Our next speaker is here to pull back the curtain on a vital topic. She is going to Our next speaker is here to pull back the curtain on a vital topic. She is going to cut through the jargon and give us the practical, actionable steps we need to ensure every component we build is robust and usable for everyone. Please join me in welcoming Victoria Ottah as she presents The Unseen User, Building Accessible Web Experiences from Screen Readers. Victoria, the stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. Hope we are enjoying our event so far. I'm Victoria for short, and I'm excited to be presenting this topic today. So, a little bit about me. I am an author. I am a women technical ambassador. I am a UX designer. I am an accessibility advocate, and I am an open source advocate as well. I am currently maintaining and leading accessibility in chaos. And finally, I am a founder at Accessibility Nigeria, where I am currently building a community or an organization for people with disabilities to aid them be more involved in technology and to make digital products and technology accessible and accommodating for people with disabilities. So, without further wait, let's get right to the topic. Today, I'm going to be presenting the topic, the unseen user, building accessible web experiences for keyboard and screen readers. So imagine this illustration. Um, you're working with your friends, right? And someone comes around, greets the two of your friends, you're three in the group, greets the two of your friends and lifts you out. The person doesn't say hi to you. The person comes, presents gifts the two of your friends, but doesn't gift you anything. And the same with other people. And it keeps happening and happening and happening until you get to your destination. As someone who is working with your friends, how would you feel? Left out, unseen, even invisible, right? Now, imagine how people with disabilities feel where their is made available on the web for them to engage in, and it seems like there's a setback, like they're being ignored, right? Like there's nothing specific for them. And this brings me to our topic for today, the unseen user, building accessible web experiences for keyboard and screen reader users. I'd like to open up this discussion with this statement. Accessibility afterthought. The web should be accessible to everyone. It's not something you do in a hurry. It's not something you do after you've made other plans. It's not something you put in as an afterthought after you've done everything. No, you should start from the throw, from the foundation, from the beginning. It's not an afterthought. In the course of this conversation, in this discussion, we're going to be discussing 4 points. One, we're going to define digital accessibility and why it matters. We're going to be introducing keyboard users and screen reader users. We're going to understand assistive technology, how it works, and the DOM relationship, the document, the DOM relationship, yeah? Um, and we are going to also learn about web practices, semantic HTML, logical focus order, and ARIA attributes as best practices for implementing accessibility for keyboard users and screen reader users. So let's set up this conversation. What is digital accessibility? Digital accessibility is the practice of designing, developing websites, digital tools, and technologies so that people with disabilities can use them. As you can see, there are emphasis on specific words that we should pay attention to. Designing, developing websites, digital tools, technologies, and most importantly, people with disabilities. Accessibility standard is primarily defined by the Web Content Accessibility Guideline, WCAG, and they are built on four fundamental principles. These principles are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Now, how do we build the web to follow these principles? What do they mean? Perceivable. When the web is perceivable, it means that people must be able to figure out information using more than just one sense, right? More than one of the senses. So we have the sense of sight, hearing, and touch. And if you notice, most times the web digital products are built for visual users, right? Mostly built for visual users. But in this case, you're going to have to factor in other senses like hearing and touch for people who do not have the sense of sight. Operable. Operable means that the website should be easily navigable with just your keyboard or voice controls for people who are non-mouse users. Understandable. End users must be able to understand web page content and the functionality of the information, right? They should be able to understand those details easily. And finally, first, it means your website must be interpreted by a wide range of user agents and can be effectively communicated to all users, including users who make use of assistive technologies and remain compatible with whatever evolving technology or the user needs as the case may be. Because, we trends, we grow the growth of technology. Your product must be able to evolve as technology evolves. Now, we have introduced accessibility. We know what we're talking about right now. So, who are keyboard and screen reader users? Keyboard users are people with motor disabilities. People who use keyboard most of the time, people with motor disabilities, they probably have issues with their spine, they're not able to move one or any of their limbs, right? They can be people with visual disabilities, either they are completely blind or have a visual impairment where they cannot see properly. They can have temporary disabilities, right? They can have like an injury at the moment, right? That does not enable them to use mouse effectively, and they tend to use keyboards. They can also be assistive technology users. And who are keyboard users? Sorry, and who are screen reader users? Screen reader users can also be motor disability, people with motor disability, people with cognitive disability or learning disability, people with visual impairment. And what's the workability of the screen reader? How does it work? The screen reader reads out content on that page, right? So it's reading it out in form of synthetic speech to the hearing, or it is converted it to a refreshable braille, right? Examples of some screen readers, we have the JAWS, the NVDA, the VoiceOver, and so on. When I say refreshable braille, this is what I mean. It means that it is converted to braille for people who do not hear. I'm sure you've seen people who are deaf and blind at the same time. This is actually very beneficial for these users. How does assistive technology work? The DOM relationship. This will be the next subtopic of conversation. If you noticed from explaining who keyboard users are and who screen reader users are, notice that there's a connection, right? They are connected. Keyboard users most times use screen readers and vice versa. There is a relationship between the both of them, right? Because the keyboards are used to control or transfer information, right? That helps the screen reader content to the user who has a disability. Now, relationship brings us to what we call the accessibility tree, right? So, what is the accessibility tree? The accessibility tree is a crucial non-visual structure that is created by web browsers that allows sensitive technology like screen reader to understand and interact with content of a web page. Look at the definition properly. You can take a picture. Yeah, it seems like a whole lot of stuff. Now, let's break it down. What does this mean? It means on your editor, when you put your HTML, you write your code, together they form the DOM. Okay? So together they form the. Now, the DOM, the job of the DOM is to convert or translate um, information in a way that is understood, right? After this is done, it either converts it to a user interface, which is the visual that we can see. Then for people who have disabilities, the browser converts it to an accessibility tree. I don't know if that makes sense, right? So now the accessibility tree now is what the assistive technology can, is what the assistive technology or the screen reader can access or can, sorry about that. Sorry about that. So the accessibility tree or is what the screen reader now can access, right? Those information, the code on that part. Where do you find this? When you go to your page, you go to your inspect. That part of your inspect, yeah, that's the accessibility tree, and that is what your screen reader is able to give. The information is able to give to person with disability. So that's what this typically means. I have a pictorial illustration for this. Okay, so this is a picture of saying, right? So we see that the HTML, the code, together it forms the document object model, the DOM, right? Now, some of them, when it forms the DOM, it either forms a UI or it forms accessibility. But it forms the UI and the accessibility tree at the same time. I'm using either because it all depends on you. It depends on the format of um, coding that you use, a semantic format. That is the only way it will form an accessibility tree that people with disability will be able to benefit from, right? So this is what an accessibility tree is. With that information in mind, let's carry on. Now, how does this screen reader announce information to a user with disability? Three things. One, a role. It tells the user what the element is. Example, is it a button? Is it a link? Is it a heading? Right? And this is mostly derived from the HTML tag that you use. And that is why I said either. It's supposed to be a must, yes, but as a developer, it all depends on you. If you use the correct tag, semantic HTML, then you're on the right track. Okay, so the second way is through the name, the label or this that's associated with the elements. Example, the text inside the button or the alt text that you want to use to describe an image, it is announced to them. And third, the state or the value. So the element's current state or condition is also announced alongside to the user. So it tells the user whether it's checked or not, whether the field is expanded or not, whether the button is disabled or enabled, right? So, and then the user, even though the person doesn't have sight, can be able to understand the information that is in the page. Now, what makes a website accessible to keyboard and screen reader users? Here are a few things. Focusability. It means that all interactive elements must have keyboard focus. Keyboard focus. So, what do we mean by interactive elements? I'm talking about the links. I'm talking about the buttons. I'm talking about the checkboxes. Okay, they should be interactive. There should be visual focus orders that indicate that the person is on a particular element or on a particular content. It should be visible. There should be a visible indicator. It usually comes in form of a ring, a focus ring, or an outline that shows that the person is currently on this part on the page, right? And that's why when the person uses their keyboard to tap, it goes from one interactive element to the other because you have made that interactive element keyboard focused. Another way is logical focus order. What does this mean? It means that your focus order should be sequential. There should be sequential tabbing. Use accurate layouts and structure, right? So it's depending on the internalization um, formats that you're using for whatever culture or country. If you're doing for English, that's it's from up to down and left, right, left to right. Yeah. So if you're doing English, that's up to left to right. You know that it should be sequential. If you're doing for other countries, the opposite, you should just follow the right and accurate layout and sequential structure, right, for the user to be able to understand. Also, your focus order should match the visual, right? If this is saying an image, the focus order should be on the image. It should not be on the footer. It should not be on any other part on the screen, right? It should not confuse the user. The user should not be looking for, oh, this says link and the link is at the bottom. Where is the link, right? It should match the visual and logical order of the content. Again, operability rather. Your keyboard users most times they rely on specific keys to activate different controls, and this makes it easy for them to be able to access the web, use your content, and do it without wasting time because this is their day-to-day life, right? So there are some shortcuts, some elements that represent some primary activation keys. For instance, for the button, it's mostly the enter or space button. For the link, is mostly the enter button. For the checkboxes, mostly the space button, font field, any of your typing characters, complex widgets, your arrows. If you want to tap through interactive um, elements, you can use your tab key and the shift tab to go backwards. So make sure that your keyboard um, is operable with this specific primary activation keys. Another thing, another way to make your to build for keyboard and screen reader users is effective navigation. And skipping to skip large repeated blocks of content. Allow your users to be able to skip large repeated forms block of content. Example, if it's a site has a wide navigation bar, they should be able to skip to the main content link and take them to whatever information or whatever page you want to go to without having to click it one after the other and waste all day. Also, landmarks. So you should use structural elements, right? For your, and this is why a good layout or a structured layout is important. They should be able to move from the nav bar to the main to the header and so on. So when you use tags or elements like these when you're building products, or you're building the web, it makes it easier, easy navigation between major page sections. Now, let's talk about these best practices. And we're going to start with semantic HTML. Mentioned it earlier when we were introducing, mentioned it a few times when we were talking about um, screen reader and keyboard, and then we're going to focus on them. So what are these semantic HTML? What does semantic HTML mean, and what are the semantic HTML elements? So semantic HTML simply means using HTML elements, native elements to build the web, right? So these elements clearly describe the content to both the browser and the developer, and in turn, the user who is using your product. Okay, so some examples are your header, your nav, the main, the button, and your headings 1 to 6. These are native semantic elements. And the same way we have semantic elements, we have non-semantic elements. And an example is your div tag. Okay, so now what are some semantic HTML best practices? One of them is structuring your page. We touched a little bit of it earlier, but use native landmark elements for major sections. Your header, your nav, your main, aside, footer, as the case may be. Use correct native landmark elements to properly structure your page, right? Second, interactive controls. Always use buttons for actions and always use it for actions, right? Form elements. Always spare labels with inputs, right? Using your ID attribute for clear content. Labeling content is actually very important because the screen reader has to pick these labels to know what exactly the content is about, right? So if you're let's say, for instance, you're building a button that says button without telling the user what kind of button it is, that's confusing, right? And that's difficult for screen reader users or keyboard users, as the case may be. Oh, sorry, I skipped a lot. Okay. Now we have for your tables and your list, use, excuse me, use proper table, proper tags for your table, like your table tag, which head, the key body, and for your list, use your ordered and your unordered list where and when necessary for hierarchy and structure, right? Remember, structure, as we mentioned a couple of times, as it is very important for people who are using um, screen readers and keyboard. They can't see the screen, so they're depending on how well you structure the web. Now, I have two images that show an example of using correct tags and improper tags in building a button. So this is not how it's going to look, of course. Okay, yeah, this is an exact picture, and by the side you have just assume this is as this is your editor. It's not your editor, but just assume it is, right? So you see that for this first image, just to build a button, the developer did not use, I don't want to say it's me, it's not me, it's just an example. Yeah. But the developer did not use the right tag or elements to build this. And this of course is going to affect the accessibility tree, right? An unnecessary use of ARIA attribute and the wrong use of div in building of this button. Whereas in this other one, the proper use of the native button element, which is what is advised. Use the proper native elements when you're building your web. Okay. So let's go to focus other best practices. For keyboard accessibility, if a feature cannot be operated solely by the keyboard, it is inaccessible. As simple as that. Not everybody can use the mouse, right? We've already stated that as a foundation that some people have motor disabilities and they're unable to use the mouse. Either they have spine injuries that make their limbs immovable, or they have diseases like Parkinson's disease, whatever it is, they have motor disabilities in general, and they're able to use the mouse. So they depend on using the keyboard to access the web. So when you have features that are not operable using keyboard alone without the assistance of a mouse, then it is not accessible, right? Another thing is you should pay attention to the golden rule of logical order. The focus order must follow the visual projection of the page, right? And we already mentioned this. It is usually from left to right, top to bottom, but please also consider your internalization depending on the country that you're building the web for and the pattern that they use. Another thing to pay attention to is managing the focus, your focus using tab index, right? So use tab index 0 to make non-interactive elements focusable, right? Non-interactive elements like your paragraph, right? Now let's talk about ARIA attributes. ARIA simply is accessible rich internet form, right? And it is a secret weapon for complex widgets when a native element does not exist, but only when the HTML fails. This is very important. I had to read it out. It's very important. I know that we always have the urge to, just like designers love to be creative, um, sometimes developers love to be adventurous to try new things, right? Which is not a bad thing. But if you're going to use an area attribute, make sure that you're not using it on an element that already exists. As much as possible, use native elements, right? Only use area when the native elements, the native HTML elements fail. Okay, so how does area work? It defines what an element is, its states and properties, and labeling, right? So an example, role, you can put your role as you can actually build it yourself. That's like the whole point. You can actually do it yourself using these tags for area. Again, remember, it is only when your native HTML fails. Area attribute practices. For emphasis sake, this is still the first rule of area. If you use a native HTML element or attribute with semantics and behavior you require, use it. If you can use rather a native HTML element, use it rather than using area, which I've already stated earlier, right? Always let the native elements be your first go-to, be your go-to, be your first try, be the first thing you implement. Okay. Secondly, avoid redundant area. Example, adding row equal to button because we already have a button tag, a button element. Um, Avoid misrepresenting functionality using area to change native role in an element. Still boils down to saying the same thing. Now, this has been an amazing discussion. What have we learned so far? We've learned we've introduced our unseen users, right? And we've learned that they refer to, in this case, people who navigate the web without a mouse or sites primarily. We've also learned who keyboard and screen reader users are, and the relationship between the screen reader and the keyboard, and the relationship in the document object model, the accessibility tree. We have also learned that screen readers do not read visual presentation like a CSS, just HTML. And these screen readers only read the accessibility tree. So as much as possible, we should make sure that our accessibility tree is going to be readable by your screen readers. And how do you do that? Using semantic HTML or native HTML as much as possible, because this is what the screen reader picks. And we have also learned best practices on how to build for keyboard users and screen reader users. So there is lots to unpack. If you noticed, this is supposed to be more of a practical conversation, which is why we see a whole lot of tags and elements in the slide, right? So there's a lot to unpack and a lot of practical things to, to implement or as a practice, like an assignment, right? But let this be our key takeaway for the unseen user, right? I'm using unseen user to represent, in this case, in the course of our conversation, I'm using on-screen reader to represent the screen reader user and the keyboard user, right? So for the unseen user, the web can only be accessible when it is built using elements explicitly defined using HTML, semantic HTML, or ARIA attributes where necessary, right? So if we are going to remember anything from this talk, this should be it, right? The web can only be accessed when it is built with semantic HTML or ARIA attributes where necessary. That is the only time users with screen readers or keyboard users can access the web. Thank you. So if you want to learn more about accessibility, you can check out my blog, torianinablog.medium. You can scan the QR code on the screen, or you can copy this to the link. Also, I mentioned that I was an author. So if you want to learn more about accessibility, you can check out Digital Accessibility Ethics, new release this year. The link is on the screen. I'm hoping this slide's available. You can copy it from the screen when you're watching the video again, I guess. Digital accessibility ethics, disability inclusion, and all things tech. And finally, let's connect. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Victoria. That was really exciting. Nice to see how developers can plug in accessibility in their work and how to make websites and maybe applications accessible to everyone's. I think it's really important. The world and the developer ecosystem are sort of giving more attention to accessible products, and it's becoming a norms now and not necessarily an added feature. So each and every one of us should work to have accessibility in our applications. Yeah, so that's all about that. Thank you for doing this with us, and really hope to see you next time. To our attendees, that's all for now. We have another session coming up today by 6 o'clock p.m. UTC. So 6 o'clock p.m. UTC, we have another session, and I think it's going to be on AI agents, the new frontiers of LLMs. So invite your friends to come around and also come around to also enjoy the session. And see you soon.